Anika knew the drive could be recovered. The damage wasn't the problem. She had fixed worse. So when it powered on, that didn't surprise her. What did was what came next. No files. No system read. Just a connection. Active. And she hadn't done anything to start it. The air inside Anika's small workshop was so still it felt like it was holding its breath. She wore a blue mask and a special suit to keep even the smallest piece of dust from falling. In front of her lay the ghost drive. It was a burnt, twisted piece of metal that she had pulled from a pile of corporate scrap. Most people would see trash, but Anika saw a puzzle that needed solving. To the Vane family, this drive was a secret they thought they had buried in a fire. To Anika, it was her next paycheck. She picked up her tiny silver tools. Her hands were steady, like a doctor about to start a very important surgery. The most dangerous part was the platter transplant. Inside the hard drive were shiny silver discs called platters. They held all the information. If even a single hair or a tiny speck of dust touched them, the data would be destroyed forever. Slowly, she unscrewed the melted outer shell. The smell of burnt plastic filled the room, but she didn't blink. With a pair of soft tweezers, she lifted the shiny silver discs out of the ruined casing. She moved them into a brand new, clean drive body she had prepared earlier. Every second felt like an hour. Her heart was beating fast, but she kept her fingers calm. Once the discs were in place, she tightened the last tiny screw. She sat back and wiped a bit of sweat from her forehead. Now came the big moment. She plugged the drive into her high-powered laptop and flipped the power switch. At first, there was only silence. Then, a low, soft hum filled the room. The drive was spinning. It was alive. Suddenly, her computer screen didn't show the usual folders or files. Instead, a bright red box popped up in the center of the dark screen. It wasn't a bank record or a private email. It was a live connection. The screen read, "Secure line active. Syncing with primary." Anika froze. She hadn't even clicked a button, but the drive was already talking to someone. A small speaker on her desk crackled with static. Then, a voice came through. It was deep, calm, and sounded as smooth as silk, but it was also as cold as ice. "Identify yourself," the voice commanded. "And tell me why you are holding my ghost." Anika realized right then that she hadn't just recovered a lost file. She had opened a door to a very dangerous world, and the man on the other side was already watching her. Anika stared at the red box on her screen. She had fixed thousands of hard drives, but she had never seen one act like this. Usually, a recovered drive would show a list of folders or blurry photos. This one was different. It didn't show any files at all. Instead, it had turned her computer into a high-tech walkie-talkie. The words "Secure line active" flashed in bright, steady pulses. It felt like the computer was a living heart, beating in time with the low hum of the drive on her desk. The silence in her workshop was broken by a soft crackle from her speakers. It was the sound of someone else breathing on the other end of the line. Anika's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached out to unplug the power cord, but her fingers froze. She was too curious to stop now. "Identify yourself," the voice said again. It wasn't a question, it was a command. It was the kind of voice that belonged to someone who never had to ask for things twice. It sounded like Theo Lim, the man whose name was whispered in the shadows of Aurelian Ridge. "And tell me why you are holding my ghost." Anika took a deep breath and leaned toward her microphone. "I'm a recovery specialist," she whispered, her voice shaking just a little. "I bought this drive at a scrap auction. I didn't know it belonged to anyone important. I was just trying to see if the data was still there." There was a long pause. Anika could hear the faint sound of a clock ticking in the background of the call. "A scrap auction?" the man asked. His voice was a bit softer now, but still very sharp. "The Vane family told the world that drive was destroyed in a fire. They told me it was turned to ash. If you have it, then they are liars." And if they find out you have it, you are in a lot of trouble. Anika looked at the burnt metal shell on her table. She realized the Vanes hadn't just lost this drive, they had tried to hide it. What do I do? She asked. Listen to me carefully, Anika, Theo Lim said. The moment you turned that drive on, it sent a signal to my office. The Vanes didn't receive the same signal. But they have been running a passive network monitor across the city for 3 years, watching for any unusual burst of encrypted traffic. The moment my protocol connected to my node through your laptop, their system flagged the ping. They don't know what it means yet. But they know something woke up. And they are already moving. They know the ghost is awake. They are already tracking your location. You have less than an hour before they find you. Anika looked at her watch. She was supposed to be at the Aurelian Tech Gala in 2 hours to show off her new software. She couldn't stay here, but she couldn't run either. She had to find a way to stay safe in public. The Aurelian Tech Gala was filled with bright lights and the hum of 1,000 people talking at once. The grand hall was made of glass and polished steel, reflecting the neon signs of the city outside. Anika stood behind her small display booth, her hands tucked into the pockets of her dark blazer. On her table sat the recovered drive, now hidden inside a sleek silver case. She had spent the last hour showing off her data recovery software to small crowds, but her mind was miles away. She kept thinking about the cold, silk-like voice of Theo Lim and his warning. You have less than an hour, he had told her. Anika checked her watch. Time was up. She scanned the crowd, looking past the excited students and the wealthy investors. That was when she saw them. Near the giant arched entrance of the hall, 3 men stepped out of a black elevator. They weren't wearing the colorful t-shirts or casual hoodies of the other tech experts. They wore sharp, expensive black suits that looked like armor. Their faces were as hard as stone, and they didn't stop to look at the flying drones or the new robots on display. Anika ducked her head, pretending to organize some cables on her desk. She watched them through the corner of her eye. They were moving through the room with a purpose. They weren't looking for new inventions or smart ideas. They were scanning every face in the room, searching for one person. They were looking for her. One of the men, a tall guy with a thin scar on his chin, pulled out a small tablet. He looked at the screen, then looked up, his eyes locking onto the area where the recovery specialists were stationed. Anika felt a chill run down her spine. The Vane family wasn't just coming for their drive, they were coming to make sure the person who fixed it never spoke again. She reached into her pocket and felt her phone vibrate. It was a text from the same null number from before. It was only 3 words, "Do not run." Anika stayed as still as she could, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't leave the hall without being caught, and she couldn't hide in a room made of glass. As the 3 men in black suits began to push through the crowd toward her booth, she realized she had to do something bold. She reached for her laptop and began to type as fast as she could, her fingers flying across the keys. If she couldn't hide, she would have to make it impossible for them to touch her in front of everyone. Anika didn't wait for the men to reach her booth. She grabbed her silver case and slipped through a side door into the VIP lounge. It was a quieter room with soft velvet chairs and a wide view of the city. She hoped the crowd of wealthy guests would act as a shield, but the 3 men in black suits walked in only moments later. They didn't run or shout. They moved slowly, like sharks circling their prey in a bright tank. The man with the scar on his chin stepped forward. He didn't look angry, he looked like he was about to close a business deal. He sat down in the chair across from Anika and placed a thick, gold-trimmed folder on the table. The other 2 men stood behind him, crossing their arms and blocking the exit. Anika Rowe, the man said, his voice low and calm. My name is Silas. I work for the Vane family. We heard you found something that belongs to us. We aren't here to cause trouble. In fact, we want to help you. He pushed the folder toward her. Inside was a document labeled Exclusive Consulting Contract. Anika glanced at the numbers on the page. It was a check for $1 million. This is a lot of money for a consultant who just fixes broken computers, Anika said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. It's not just for your work, Silas replied, leaning in. It's for your silence. You sign this, you hand over that silver case, and you never speak about what you found on that drive again. You'll be rich, and we'll be happy. It's a very simple trade. Anika knew it wasn't a trade. It was a bribe. Once she signed that paper and gave them the drive, she would have no power left. They could make her disappear, and nobody would ever know why. Just as she was about to speak, her phone vibrated in her lap. She glanced down at the screen. It was another call from the null number. She didn't answer it out loud. Instead, she pressed a button on the side of her phone that she had programmed earlier. Suddenly, the giant digital screens on the lounge walls flickered. The bright advertisements for new cars and expensive watches vanished. In their place, a grainy video started to play. It showed the Vane family's private bank symbols and a list of secret names. The color drained from Silas's face. He stood up quickly, looking around the room as other guests began to point at the screens. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "I'm not the only one on this line," Anika whispered. Her phone vibrated again, a long pulse this time. It was a signal. Theo Lim was no longer just watching, he was ready to make his move. The VIP lounge felt smaller every second as Silas stepped closer to Anika. His eyes were no longer calm, they were filled with a cold, quiet anger. He reached out his hand, expecting her to hand over the silver case. Anika knew she couldn't outrun these men, and she certainly couldn't fight them. But she didn't need to be strong if she was smart. She kept her fingers resting on her phone, hidden under the edge of the table. "Give us the drive, Anika," Silas whispered. "Before this gets messy." Anika didn't look at him. She looked down at her screen. While Silas had been talking, her phone had buzzed once, quietly, from the null line. No words. Just two things delivered silently. An audio file and a live access icon for the building's main sound system. Theo had been listening to everything through the open line. He had heard Silas the moment he sat down. And he had spent that time doing what he always did. Preparing. The icon blinked blue and steady, waiting for her. With one quick click, she sent a command through the hotel's wireless network. Suddenly, the soft jazz music playing in the background stopped. The entire grand hall went silent for a heartbeat. Then, a new sound filled the room. It wasn't music. It was a recording. It was a man's voice, the head of the Vane family, talking about how they had planned to frame Theo Lim. "Once the drive is burned," the voice boomed over the speakers for everyone to hear, "Lim will have no proof. We will own this city by morning." The clip only lasted 5 seconds, but it was enough. The high society guests stopped talking. The waiters froze with their trays. Every person in the VIP lounge turned their heads toward the speakers, then toward Silas and his men. Silas stood perfectly still, his hands still stretched out. He looked like a statue. He knew that if he touched Anika now, hundreds of people would see him as a criminal. He was trapped in the spotlight of his own secret. Anika stood up slowly, clutching the silver case to her chest. She could feel the vibration of her phone again. It wasn't a text this time. It was a GPS update showing a line of black cars pulling up to the very front of the hotel. The Vanes had lost their chance to be quiet, and now the real power in the city was arriving to claim what was his. Anika walked past the frozen men in black suits, her heart racing as she headed toward the elevators. She knew the most dangerous part of the night was just beginning, and she was about to meet the man behind the silk voice in person. Anika did not look back as she stepped out of the VIP lounge. Her legs felt like jelly, but she kept her head high. She clutched the silver case against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Behind her, Silas and his men stood like statues. They knew that if they reached out to grab her, the audio recording would start playing again. This time, it wouldn't just be a 5-second clip. It would be the whole truth, and it would be sent to every news station in the city. The grand hall of the gala was a sea of confused faces. People were whispering and pointing at the speakers, wondering where the strange voice had come from. Anika pushed through the heavy glass doors at the front of the building. The cool night air hit her face, and for a second, she could finally breathe. Waiting right at the curb was a line of 4 matching black sedans. They were perfectly clean, their paint reflecting the neon lights of the skyscrapers above. They didn't have sirens or loud music. They just sat there, humming quietly. This was Theo Lim's motorcade. He hadn't sent an army to break down the doors. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to change the air around the hotel. Silas and his 2 men stepped out onto the sidewalk a few feet behind Anika. They looked at the black cars, then at the many security cameras mounted on the hotel walls. They were trapped. If they attacked Anika now, it would be caught on camera in front of the most powerful people in the city. Silas let out a frustrated breath and lowered his hands. He signaled to his men to stay back. He had lost this round, and he knew it. Anika walked toward the lead car. The back door opened silently, as if it knew she was coming. She didn't see a driver at first, just the dark, comfortable interior of the vehicle. She stepped inside, and the door clicked shut with a heavy, expensive thud. The noise of the city and the gala vanished instantly. Inside, the air smelled like expensive tea and old books. A man sat in the shadows of the far seat. He was wearing a dark suit with a perfectly folded silk tie. He didn't turn to look at her right away. He was busy looking at a small tablet in his hand. "You handled that well, Anika," the voice said. It was the same smooth, silk voice from the phone. Most people would have fainted in that lounge. "You decided to start a fire instead." Anika finally looked at Theo Lim. He was younger than she expected, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He tucked his tablet away and finally turned his gaze toward her. "Now," he said quietly as the car began to pull away from the curb. "Let's go somewhere where we can talk without being recorded." The car door clicked shut, and the noise of the city disappeared. Anika sat in the soft leather seat, her silver case pressed tightly against her chest. Theo Lim finally turned to look at her, and she understood immediately why people in Aurelian Ridge spoke his name in whispers. His eyes were sharp and steady, like someone who had never once been surprised by anything in his entire life. "Until tonight. You played a 5-second audio clip over a hotel sound system and walked out of a room full of vain soldiers," he said quietly. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "From broken things," Anika replied. "Broken things always tell the truth." Theo studied her for a long moment, then looked out the window as the car moved through the glowing city. He told her that 3 years ago, the Vane family had stolen his entire research archive. Not by hacking his software. They had physically swapped his original server drives with near-perfect copies while his building was being inspected for a fake fire safety check. By the time he realized what had happened, the originals were gone, and the copies showed nothing but empty folders. Every court in the city had already looked at the evidence and ruled against him. The Vanes had made him look like a liar. But why? Anika asked. What was on those drives that was worth all of this? Theo was quiet for a long moment. The city lights moved across his face like slow water. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than she had heard it all night. "For the last 6 years, I have been quietly mapping every hidden financial connection between the 12 most powerful families in Aurelian Ridge," he said. "Every secret deal. Every buried debt. Every illegal agreement that keeps this city running the way it does. It is all on those drives. Names, numbers, dates, and proof that cannot be argued with." He paused. The Vanes were not trying to protect themselves, Anika. They were trying to protect all of them. Because if that information ever reaches the right hands, it does not just destroy the Vane family. It brings down every family that has ever run this city. All 12 of them. At once. The car felt very small suddenly. Anika looked down at the silver case in her lap and understood for the first time exactly what she had been carrying through a hotel full of people, across a city sidewalk, and into the back of this car. She had not recovered a hard drive. She had recovered a map of everything that was rotten underneath Aurelian Ridge. And now every one of those 12 families would be coming for it. But the original drives had something the copies didn't, Theo said, his voice dropping low. A physical burn signature. Every real drive I ever owned was formatted in a specific pattern. It leaves a microscopic mark on the platters that no copy machine can fake. But that wasn't the only thing I built into them. Each drive had a dormant emergency protocol written directly into the controller board at the hardware level. Not a tracker. Not a live signal. Something much harder to detect and much harder to fake. It would only activate under one very specific condition. The drive had to be fully rebuilt, matching donor components, clean casing, stable power, proper environment, and successfully spun up by someone who actually knew what they were doing. A burnt or partially working drive produces corrupted current. The protocol reads that as a false start and stays completely silent. The veins damaged every drive before they dumped them. They never did a proper rebuild because they didn't need the data. They just needed the evidence gone. 3 years of silence wasn't me failing to find the drives. It was the drives waiting for the right pair of hands. Tonight, for the first time, every condition was met perfectly. Your transplant was flawless, Anika. The protocol activated, it found my node, and I answered. He paused and looked directly at her silver case. If even one of those original drives still exists in a condition someone like you could rebuild. He didn't finish the sentence. Anika's breath caught in her throat. She slowly opened the case and looked down at the recovered drive. She thought back to the moment she had lifted the platters out under her microscope light. She had noticed a faint, unusual ring pattern near the inner edge, almost like a fingerprint. She had assumed it was heat damage. It wasn't heat damage. Theo, she whispered, her voice barely making a sound. I think I've been holding your proof this entire time and didn't even know it. The car went completely silent. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Theo leaned forward slowly, and for the first time that night, the calm, unshakable Theo Lim looked like a man who had just seen the sun rise after 3 very long years of darkness. Can you confirm it? He asked. I need my full kit, a clean surface, and about 40 minutes, Anika said, sitting up straight. But yes. I can read that signature like a book. Theo reached forward and tapped the driver's headrest once. Change of plans, he said quietly. Take us to the archive. Anika didn't ask what the archive was. She looked down at the drive in her hands and felt the weight of everything it was carrying. The car turned smoothly into the dark, and the real work was just beginning. The archive wasn't what Anika expected. She had imagined a cold server room full of blinking lights and humming machines. Instead, the car stopped in front of a building that looked like an ordinary old bookshop wedged between 2 tall glass towers. A small brass sign above the door read Meridian Records. Inside, the front room smelled like paper and dust, but behind the wooden bookshelf at the back was a heavy steel door that required Theo's thumbprint to open. Behind that door was the cleanest, most carefully built forensic workspace Anika had ever seen. Long white tables, precision lighting, humidity control, and every tool she could ever need, all organized in perfect rows. She stopped walking and just stared. You built a recovery lab, she said slowly. I built it 3 years ago, Theo replied, standing behind her. I always believed the original drives were still out there somewhere. I just needed the right person to find them. Anika walked to the main table and set her silver case down carefully. She pulled on a fresh pair of clean gloves and clipped her magnifying scope into position. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. She opened the case and lifted the recovered drive under the scope light. There it was. The ring pattern she had noticed during the transplant. Under the precision lighting of the archive, it wasn't just a faint mark anymore. It was sharp and clear, a series of perfectly spaced microgrooves pressed into the inner platter surface during the original formatting process. It was Theo's digital fingerprint, baked into the physical metal itself. No copy drive would ever have it. It's real, she said, her voice steady. This is your original drive, Theo. This is the one they stole. She heard him exhale slowly behind her, a long and quiet breath, like someone putting down something very heavy. But before either of them could say another word, Anika's phone lit up the table with a sharp white glow. It was a news alert. She picked it up and read the headline. Her stomach dropped. Breaking, anonymous tip claims LIM data archives are fraudulent. City fraud office opens emergency review. The Vane family hadn't sent more men. They had done something far more dangerous. They had called the city's own fraud department and pointed the finger at Theo. If the fraud office arrived before Anika could document and certify the burned signature as genuine evidence, the drive would be seized, locked away in a government evidence room, and buried under legal delays for years. She looked at the drive. She looked at the clock on the wall. How long until the fraud office can issue a search order, she asked. In this city? Theo said grimly. The Vanes have friends in that building. 2 hours. Maybe less. Anika pulled her documentation camera from her kit and looked at him steadily. Then stop talking and start the timestamp recorder, she said. Because we have exactly one chance to do this right. Anika worked like the room was on fire, but her hands never shook. That was the thing about her, the thing that made her different from every other person Theo had hired over 3 years. Pressure made most people sloppy. It made Anika precise. She photographed every layer of the platter surface in sections, each image stamped with a live timestamp from the archive's certified legal recorder. She documented the microgroove pattern from 4 different angles, cross-referencing each image against the original formatting report that Theo pulled from a locked drawer. The report was dated, notarized, and had never been submitted to any court because Theo had never had the physical drive to match it against. Until now. As she worked, Theo stood at a slim panel on the wall, quietly sending encrypted files to his legal team. He wasn't panicking. He was moving the way she moved, steady, deliberate, one step at a time. The Vanes are smart, Anika said without looking up from her scope. They didn't destroy this drive completely because they couldn't. Platters at this grade don't melt cleanly in a basic fire. They would have needed industrial equipment to fully erase it. So they damaged it just enough to make it look destroyed, then dumped it in a liquidation pallet, assuming nobody would ever think to look inside. They didn't count on a forensic scavenger buying scrap metal at 3 in the morning, Theo said quietly. Anika allowed herself a small smile and kept working. 40 minutes later, she set her tools down and straightened up. Her back ached and her eyes were tired, but on the white table in front of her was a complete, certified forensic package. Photographs, measurements, chain of custody records, and a signed specialist's report confirming the drive's origin. It was the kind of evidence that didn't bend under pressure. It was physical. It was permanent. It was real. That's everything a judge needs, she said, stepping back. Theo picked up the documentation folder and looked through it slowly. When he reached the last page, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face all night. It wasn't the sharp, calculating look of a man running calculations. It was something simpler. It was relief. The fraud office will be here within the hour, he said. But it won't matter anymore. We'll meet them at the door with this. He closed the folder and looked at her. Anika. The Vanes have buried 3 lawyers, 2 journalists, and an entire forensic firm over the last 3 years. All of them had pieces of this story. None of them had the drive. He paused. You had it for 6 hours. Anika picked up her silver case and clicked it shut. Outside, through the small frosted window near the ceiling, she could see the first pale light of early morning beginning to touch the glass towers of Aurelian Ridge. She didn't feel like celebrating. She felt like someone who had just finished a very long, very delicate surgery. The patient was going to live. That was enough. For now. But her phone buzzed one last time on the table, and when she looked at the screen, her tired eyes went sharp again immediately. It was a message from an unknown number she had never seen before, different from Theo's null line entirely. It was only one sentence long. There were 6 drives on that liquidation pallet, Anika. You only found one. Anika read the message 3 times. Then she looked up at Theo. She didn't have to say anything. He crossed the room, read the screen, and his jaw tightened almost invisibly. It was the smallest crack in his composure she had seen all night, which told her everything. 6 drives meant 6 separate pieces of buried evidence. The one she had recovered was enough to reopen his case and expose the veins in court. But 5 more drives still out there meant 5 more chances for someone else to find them first, and not everyone who went looking would be on the right side of this story. Did you know? She asked. I suspected, Theo said carefully. The veins didn't steal just one archive. They took an entire research cycle. I always assumed it was spread across multiple drives, but I never had confirmation. He looked at the message again. The question is, who sent this? Anika took her phone back and stared at the unknown number. She pulled up the auction records on her laptop, the same ones she had used to buy the drive the night before. The liquidation pallet had been listed under a generic corporate clearance code. But the seller's processing stamp told her which warehouse it had come from before the auction. Meridian District Storage, Unit 7. Cleared 3 years ago. Theo, she said slowly. Whoever listed this pallet didn't want this evidence destroyed. They scattered it on purpose. Different auction houses, different pallets, different cities maybe. Someone inside the Vane organization wanted this evidence hidden somewhere it could be found again, by the right person, at the right time. Theo was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and opened his laptop. He typed something, waited, and his face went completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a careful man. The frozen stillness of someone genuinely shocked. What is it? Anika asked. He turned the laptop toward her without a word. On the screen was a warehouse inventory record from Meridian District Storage. Unit 7. It showed a complete list of every item cleared from that unit 3 years ago, including the liquidation pallet she had bought. At the bottom of the record was the name of the person who had authorized the clearance and quietly routed it to a public auction instead of the Vane family's private incinerator. Anika stared at the name. Her mouth went dry. It was Silas. The same Silas who had cornered her in the VIP lounge. The same Silas who had slid $1 million contract across the table and told her to stay quiet. The same Silas who had spent the entire night hunting her across the city on behalf of the Vane family. He hadn't been chasing her to recover the drive. He had been chasing her to make sure she found it safely. The room tilted slightly. Anika grabbed the edge of the table and thought back through the whole night. The way Silas had moved slowly in the lounge, giving her time to think. The way his man had stopped just short of the door at the gala. The way he had lowered his hands on the sidewalk without a fight, almost as if he was relieved when Theo's cars arrived. He hadn't been stopping her. He had been guiding her. Her phone buzzed one final time. The unknown number again. This time it wasn't a sentence. It was a single word. 3. 3 years ago, Silas had hidden the drives. 3 years of waiting for someone exactly like Anika to come along. She looked at Theo, and she could see he had reached the same conclusion she had. The Vane family hadn't just lost tonight. They had been losing for 3 years without ever knowing it. Their most trusted soldier had been quietly building the case against them from the inside, one scattered drive at a time, waiting for a forensic scavenger to light the fuse. Theo set a small black card on the table between them. No name, no logo. Just one engraved line. Meridian Consulting, Specialist Division. Anika looked at the card. Then she looked at her phone. Then she looked at Theo with something close to a laugh building in her chest. You didn't find me because of the drive signal, she said slowly. Did you? Theo's expression didn't change. But for just a fraction of a second, the corner of his mouth moved. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Anika picked up the card, picked up her silver case, and walked toward the door. 5 drives still out there. 1 inside man. And a city that had no idea the ground beneath it had already shifted. She paused at the door with her hand on the frame, her back to Theo. "I'm going to need a bigger kit," she said. "And Theo?" "Yes," he replied. "Next time you decide to use someone as bait," she said quietly, "have the decency to warn them first." She walked out into the gold morning light and didn't look back. Behind her, in the silence of the archive, Theo Lim finally allowed himself a full, slow smile. It was the first real one he'd had in 3 years.